Wife had an affair and got pregnant but refused a paternity test because her intuition told her who the father was, so she left me, until he kicked them out when DNA proved the baby wasn't his. So this whole mess started about 2 years ago when my wife Leslie and I were having some rough patches in our marriage. We'd been married for 6 years at that point and things had gotten pretty routine. You know how it is when you're both working full time and just going through the motions. Leslie worked as a marketing coordinator and I'm an electrician, so our schedules were pretty different and we weren't spending much time together anyway. I should probably mention that Leslie and I had been trying to have kids for about 3 years with no luck. We'd done some basic fertility testing and everything came back normal for both of us, so the doctors just said to keep trying and maybe consider IVF down the line. It was putting a lot of stress on our relationship because Leslie really wanted to be a mom and I could see how much it was eating at her every month when we'd get disappointed again. Around this time Leslie started going out more with her coworkers after work, which honestly I was fine with because she seemed happier and more social. Her company had hired this new guy Russell who was some kind of consultant or something, and Leslie would mention him sometimes when she talked about work stuff. He was apparently really successful and had worked for some big companies in California before moving to our city. I didn't think much of it at first because Leslie had always been friendly with her coworkers. But then Leslie started working late more often and going to these company events that seemed to happen every other week. She'd come home talking about how Russell had such interesting stories about his travels and his business ventures, and how he was thinking about starting his own company soon. I started noticing she was dressing up more for work too, like she was putting extra effort into how she looked, but when I'd compliment her she'd just shrug it off. The first real red flag was when Leslie came home from one of these work events and she was acting really weird and giggly. She kept checking her phone and smiling at it, and when I asked what was so funny she said it was just some inside joke from work that I wouldn't understand. That rubbed me the wrong way because Leslie had never been secretive about her phone before. We'd always been pretty open about that stuff. Over the next few months Leslie became more and more distant. She'd come home from work and go straight to her laptop or her phone instead of talking to me about our days like we used to. When I'd try to plan date nights or suggest we do something together on weekends, she'd always have some excuse about being tired or having plans with coworkers. The worst part was that our bedroom life basically disappeared completely, and when I'd try to initiate anything she'd say she was stressed about work or not feeling well. I confronted her about it a few times but she'd just say I was being paranoid and that she was going through a lot with work pressure and the whole fertility thing. She'd flip it around and say I wasn't being supportive enough and that maybe if I showed more interest in her career and her friendships she wouldn't feel like she had to keep everything separate. So I backed off, but I could feel something was really wrong. Then about 18 months ago Leslie came home from work one day and she looked different, like she was glowing or something. She seemed excited and nervous at the same time, and she kept fidgeting with her hands. Finally she sat me down and said she had something important to tell me. My first thought was that maybe she'd gotten a promotion or something because of how she was acting. But instead she told me she was pregnant. I was shocked because we hadn't been intimate in weeks, but my first reaction was pure joy because this was what we'd been trying for so long. I jumped up to hug her and started talking about how amazing this was and how we needed to call our families and start planning. But Leslie didn't hug me back and she had this weird expression on her face that I couldn't read. That's when she said the baby might not be mine. I just stood there staring at her because I couldn't process what she was saying. She started talking really fast about how she'd made a mistake and had been seeing someone from work, and how she was sorry but she needed to be honest with me now that she was pregnant. She said she'd been having an affair with Russell for about 4 months and they'd been careless a few times. I asked her if she wanted to work things out and if we could get a paternity test to figure out what was going on, because despite everything I still loved her and wanted to try to save our marriage. But then she said something that just completely blindsided me. She said she didn't think we needed a paternity test because she had a strong feeling the baby was Russell's. When I asked her what that meant, she said she just had this intuition about it, like she could feel that the baby belonged to Russell because their connection was so much deeper than what she and I had. She said when they were together she felt this spiritual and emotional bond that she'd never experienced before, and that she just knew in her heart that this baby was meant to be his. I told her that was completely insane and that intuition doesn't determine paternity, but she got really defensive and said I wouldn't understand because Russell and I were completely different types of men. She said Russell was more emotionally intelligent and spiritually aware, and that when you have that kind of connection with someone you just know things on a deeper level. At this point I was getting angry because she was talking about this other guy like he was some kind of enlightened being while basically telling me I was too simple to understand their cosmic connection. I told her we were getting a paternity test whether she liked it or not because I had a right to know if I was going to be a father. But Leslie refused. She said she didn't want to put the baby through unnecessary stress and that she was confident about who the father was. She said Russell had agreed to step up and take responsibility, and that they were planning to be together as a family. She said she hoped we could divorce amicably and that maybe someday I'd understand that this was all meant to happen this way. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My wife of 6 years was sitting there telling me she was leaving me for another man, that she was pregnant with his baby, and that she was basing all of this on some kind of mystical feeling she had. When I pointed out that she could be wrong and that I might actually be the father, she just shook her head and said her intuition was never wrong about important things. So that's how my marriage ended. Leslie moved out the next week to live with Russell, who apparently had this really nice apartment. She filed for divorce right away and refused to discuss anything about paternity testing. Her lawyer sent me papers saying she was waiving any claim to child support from me, which I guess was supposed to prove how confident she was that the baby wasn't mine. The divorce went through pretty quickly since we didn't have kids together and could split our assets without too much drama. Leslie kept posting on social media about how happy she was and how excited she was to start this new chapter of her life. She'd post pictures of her growing belly with captions about trusting the universe and following your heart, that kind of stuff. Russell seemed to be playing along with the whole thing. From what I could see on social media, he was treating Leslie like a queen, taking her on weekend trips and to fancy restaurants, buying her expensive maternity clothes. Leslie would post about how grateful she was to have found someone who truly understood her and supported her dreams. I tried to move on with my life. I focused on work and started dating again after a few months. It was hard because I kept wondering about the baby and whether it might actually be mine, but Leslie had made her choice and I had to respect that, even though I thought she was being completely irrational about the whole paternity thing. The baby was born about 7 months ago, a little girl they named Luna. Leslie posted all the typical new mom pictures and seemed really happy. Russell was in all the photos acting like the proud dad, and they looked like the perfect little family. I'll admit it was hard to see because part of me still wondered what if, but I tried not to dwell on it. But then about 3 months ago I got a phone call from Leslie and she was crying hysterically. At first I could barely understand what she was saying because she was sobbing so hard. When she finally calmed down enough to talk, she told me that Russell had gotten a paternity test done without telling her. Apparently Russell had started having doubts about whether he was really the father, especially since the baby didn't look much like him. Leslie said he'd taken some of the baby's hair while she was sleeping one day and sent it off to one of those DNA testing companies along with his own sample. When the results came back, they showed that Russell was definitely not the father. Leslie said Russell confronted her about it and demanded to know who else she'd been sleeping with. She swore to him that it had only been him and me, so the baby had to be mine after all. But then Russell said if that was true, then she needed to contact me and get a paternity test to prove it, because he wasn't going to raise another man's child. But here's the crazy part. Leslie still refused to contact me about getting a paternity test. She said her intuition was telling her that something wasn't right and that maybe the test Russell got was wrong. She said she still felt like Luna was meant to be Russell's daughter and that if they just waited and trusted the universe, everything would work out. Russell apparently did not appreciate this response. He told Leslie she had 1 week to figure out who the real father was and get proof, or he was done with both of them. Leslie spent that week trying to convince him that the test was wrong and that they should just ignore it and continue being a family, but Russell wasn't having it. So he kicked them out. Leslie called me that day crying and asking if she could come over to talk. I told her no because I wasn't going to get dragged back into her drama, especially when she'd refused to give me any information about whether I might be the father when it actually mattered. She begged me to just let her explain the situation, but I said she'd had plenty of chances to be honest with me and she'd chosen to trust her intuition instead. Over the next few weeks Leslie kept calling and texting me asking for help. She said she was staying with a friend but couldn't afford her own place without Russell's financial support. She said she was overwhelmed trying to take care of Luna by herself and that she just needed someone to help her figure things out. I ignored most of her messages because I figured this was the consequence of her choices. She'd been so confident that Russell was the father and that their spiritual connection meant more than actual facts, so now she could deal with reality on her own. But then she started showing up at my house. The first time she came over she looked terrible. She was carrying Luna and had this huge diaper bag and looked like she hadn't slept in days. She said she just needed to talk to me and explain everything, and that she realized she'd made some mistakes but we could work through them together. I told her through the door that there was nothing to work through because she'd made her choice 18 months ago when she decided her intuition was more reliable than a paternity test. She started crying and saying she'd been confused and scared, and that Russell had pressured her to choose between him and me. But I wasn't buying it because nobody had pressured her to refuse a paternity test. That was her decision based on her mystical feelings about who the father was. I told her she needed to leave and figure out her own problems. She kept coming back though. Sometimes she'd bring Luna and sometimes she'd come alone. She'd sit on my porch and call my phone begging me to just open the door and talk to her. She said she was desperate and didn't know where else to turn, and that even if Luna wasn't my biological daughter, we'd been trying to have a baby for so long that maybe this was the universe's way of giving us a family. That really pissed me off because now suddenly she wanted to talk about the universe's plan when it was convenient for her. When she thought Russell was the father, the universe had brought them together and their connection was so deep and spiritual. But now that he'd abandoned them, suddenly the universe wanted her to come back to me with another man's baby. I told her she needed to stop coming to my house or I'd call the police for harassment. She said she understood I was angry but that Luna was an innocent baby who needed stability, and couldn't I at least consider helping for the baby's sake even if I didn't want to help her. The thing is, I did feel bad for the baby because none of this was Luna's fault. But I also wasn't going to reward Leslie's terrible decision-making by swooping in to rescue her when her plan fell apart. She'd been so sure about everything when she was leaving me for Russell, so confident that her intuition was guiding her to the right choice. Now she could live with the consequences. After I threatened to call the police, Leslie stopped coming to my house for a few weeks. But then she started calling me from different numbers when I blocked her usual one. She'd leave voicemails about how sorry she was and how she realized she'd been wrong about everything. She said she'd been doing some soul searching and realized that her feelings for Russell had clouded her judgment, and that she should have handled the whole situation differently. In one of her voicemails she admitted that she'd been scared to get a paternity test because deep down she was worried that the baby might actually be mine, and that would have complicated her fantasy about running off with Russell to live this perfect life. She said she'd convinced herself that her intuition was real because it was easier than facing the possibility that she was making a huge mistake. But even with that admission, she still hadn't actually gotten a paternity test to find out whose baby Luna really was. When I called her back to ask about that, she said she was afraid to know the truth because what if Luna wasn't mine either, and then she'd be completely alone with no one to help her. I told her that was exactly why she should have gotten the test in the first place instead of making decisions based on her feelings. But she said she couldn't afford the test right now and was hoping we could just try to work things out without needing to know for sure. That's when I realized Leslie hadn't learned anything from this whole experience. She was still trying to avoid taking responsibility and still wanted other people to make decisions based on incomplete information. She wanted me to potentially raise another man's child without even knowing if it was mine, just because her other plan hadn't worked out. Update 1. After my original post, Leslie kept harassing me for another month, calling from different numbers and even having her sister contact me to try to convince me to help her out. Her sister called me and said Leslie was really struggling financially and emotionally, and that Luna was such a sweet baby who deserved to have a stable father figure in her life. She said I should consider that maybe this was all happening for a reason and that I could still have the family I'd always wanted, even if the circumstances weren't ideal. I told her sister the same thing I'd been telling Leslie, which was that I wasn't going to make any decisions about helping raise a child without knowing if it was actually mine. If Leslie wanted my help, she needed to get a paternity test first, and if Luna turned out to be my daughter then we could figure out how to co-parent responsibly. But Leslie's sister said that Leslie was afraid the test would come back negative and then she'd lose any chance of reconciling with me. She said Leslie had realized that I was the stable, reliable partner she should have chosen all along, and that she was hoping we could rebuild our relationship based on trust instead of requiring scientific proof. I almost laughed because it was the same delusional thinking that had gotten Leslie into this mess in the first place. She'd trusted her intuition over facts when it came to Russell being the father, and now she wanted me to trust her feelings over facts when it came to getting back together. She hadn't learned anything. So I told her sister that I was done discussing it and that Leslie needed to stop using other people to try to manipulate me into helping her. I said if Leslie wanted to have an adult conversation about getting a paternity test and figuring out the real situation, she could call me herself, but I wasn't going to keep playing these games. That seemed to work for a while because the calls and visits stopped. I figured Leslie had finally gotten the message and was dealing with her problems on her own. I heard through mutual friends that she'd moved back in with her parents temporarily and was looking for a job, so it seemed like she was at least trying to get her life together. But then about 2 months ago I got a call from a number I didn't recognize, and when I answered it was a man's voice asking if I was Leslie's ex-husband. I said yes and asked who was calling. He said his name was David and he was calling about the paternity situation with Luna. My first thought was that maybe Leslie had finally gotten a paternity test and this was someone from the testing company or a lawyer or something. But then David said he was calling because he'd recently found out that he might be Luna's father. I was completely confused because Leslie had sworn that she'd only been with Russell and me during the time when Luna would have been conceived. David explained that he'd been casually seeing Leslie for a few weeks around that same time period, and that she'd told him she was separated from her husband and figuring out her next steps. Apparently Leslie had met David on some dating app and they'd hooked up a few times, But then she'd suddenly stopped responding to his messages. He said he'd assumed she'd gotten back together with her husband or found someone else, so he'd moved on and hadn't thought about her again until recently. But then a friend had shown him some of Leslie's social media posts about Luna, and when he saw the baby's birth date he realized the timing lined up with when they'd been seeing each other. He said Luna had some distinctive features that reminded him of his own baby pictures, so he'd started wondering if there was a possibility he could be the father. David said he'd tried to contact Leslie directly but she wasn't responding to his messages, and he'd gotten my number from someone who knew about our situation. He wanted to know if I could help him get in touch with Leslie about getting a paternity test, because he was a responsible guy and if Luna was his daughter he wanted to step up and do the right thing. This meant Leslie had been lying to me about only being with Russell and me. She'd been seeing at least 3 different men during that time period, maybe more, and she'd been playing all of us. The whole story about her deep spiritual connection with Russell and her intuition about him being the father was complete bullshit. I gave David Leslie's current phone number and told him he could try to contact her directly, but that she'd been avoiding taking responsibility for this whole mess from the beginning. I warned him that she'd probably try to convince him that a paternity test wasn't necessary and that he should just trust her feelings about the situation. David seemed like a decent guy and said he appreciated the heads up. He said he had a good job in his own place, and if Luna was his daughter he wanted to provide for her properly instead of letting her grow up in an unstable situation. A few days later Leslie called me absolutely furious. She said I had no right to give out her contact information to some random man, and that I was trying to sabotage her life because I was bitter. She said David was harassing her and demanding a paternity test, and that she didn't even remember him that clearly because it had only been a casual thing. I told her that was exactly the problem. She'd been casual with multiple men during the same time period and then made life-changing decisions based on her intuition about which one was the father. Now there was a third possibility and she was still trying to avoid getting actual facts about the situation. Leslie said she'd looked David up on social media and he seemed like a nice enough guy, but she didn't want to complicate things even more by adding another potential father to the mix. She said she was already overwhelmed trying to figure out how to co-parent with either Russell or me, and involving David would make everything more confusing. But I pointed out that she wasn't co-parenting with Russell because he'd kicked her out, and she wasn't co-parenting with me because she'd refused to get a paternity test to find out if Luna was mine. She was just drifting around avoiding responsibility while other people tried to do the right thing. That conversation ended with Leslie hanging up on me, but apparently she did eventually agree to meet with David. From what I heard later, David convinced her that getting a paternity test was the fair thing to do for everyone involved, including Luna, who deserved to know who her real father was. So they got the test done, and guess what? David was Luna's biological father. Leslie called me after she got the results and she sounded completely defeated. She said she couldn't believe her intuition had been so wrong about everything, and that she'd destroyed her marriage and put Luna through all this instability for nothing. I told her that her intuition hadn't been wrong, she'd just been lying to herself because she wanted to believe what was most convenient at the time. When she wanted to justify leaving me for Russell, she convinced herself that their spiritual connection meant he was the father. When Russell kicked her out and she wanted me to take her back, she tried to convince herself that maybe the universe wanted us to be together after all. But the whole time she'd known there were other possibilities she was ignoring because they didn't fit the story she wanted to tell herself. David stepped up like he'd promised and took financial responsibility for Luna. He got his own paternity test to make it official, and he started paying Leslie child support and taking Luna for visits. From what I can see on social media, he seems like a good dad and Luna looks happy and healthy. Leslie moved into her own apartment with David's help and got a part-time job so she could take care of Luna while still having some income. She stopped trying to contact me, which was a relief because I was tired of being dragged into her drama. Update 2, well, I was wrong about being done with this situation. Last month Leslie showed up at my house again, but this time it was different from her previous visits. She looked put together and calm, not desperate and crying like before. She said she'd been in therapy and had some things she wanted to say to me, and asked if I'd be willing to give her 10 minutes to talk. Against my better judgment I let her in. Leslie sat down and said she'd been working with a therapist to understand why she'd made such poor decisions during our marriage and the whole affair situation. She said her therapist had helped her recognize that she'd been struggling with some deep insecurities about not being able to get pregnant, and that she'd been looking for validation and excitement outside our marriage instead of dealing with those feelings directly. She admitted that she'd been selfish and had justified her behavior by convincing herself that our marriage was already over. Leslie also acknowledged that refusing to get a paternity test had been completely irrational and unfair to everyone involved. She said she'd been so caught up in the fantasy of her relationship with Russell that she'd ignored obvious red flags and made decisions based on wishful thinking instead of reality. I'll admit this was more self-awareness than Leslie had ever shown before, and it was nice to hear her take actual responsibility for her actions instead of blaming circumstances or other people. But I also knew that Leslie was smart and manipulative, so I was waiting to see what she actually wanted from me. She said she wasn't trying to get back together or asking me to help raise Luna, because she understood that I'd moved on and that she'd burned those bridges with her behavior. But she wanted to make amends for the pain she'd caused me, and she was hoping we could eventually have some kind of civil relationship since we'd been such a big part of each other's lives. That seemed reasonable enough, and I appreciated that she wasn't asking for anything concrete from me. I told her I was glad she was getting help and taking responsibility, and that I hoped she could build a good life for herself and Luna going forward. But then Leslie said there was one more thing she needed to tell me, and this is where things got weird again. She said that during her therapy sessions, she'd been exploring her feelings about the whole paternity situation, and she'd realized that part of her had been hoping Luna would turn out to be my daughter after all. Leslie said that even though she'd convinced herself Russell was the father, there had been a part of her that was secretly relieved when his DNA test came back negative, because it meant there was still a chance Luna could be mine and we could potentially work things out. She said she'd been disappointed when David turned out to be the real father, not because David wasn't a good guy, but because it meant she'd lost any connection to me permanently. She said she'd realized that I'd been the best partner she'd ever had, and that leaving me had been the biggest mistake of her life. I could see where this was going and I cut her off before she could keep talking. I told her that I appreciated her honesty, but that it didn't change anything between us. She'd made her choices based on what she wanted at the time, and now she had to live with the consequences. Leslie said she understood that, but she wanted me to know that if I ever decided I wanted to be part of Luna's life as a friend or uncle figure, she'd welcome that. She said Luna was a great kid who could benefit from having positive male role models, and that David was supportive of Luna having other caring adults in her life. This felt like another manipulation, honestly. Leslie was presenting it as being generous and thinking about Luna's best interests, but really she was trying to create a way for us to stay connected. If I started spending time with Luna as an uncle, it would be natural for Leslie and me to end up talking regularly and potentially developing feelings again. I told Leslie I wasn't interested in that kind of arrangement because it would be confusing for everyone involved, especially Luna. If Luna needed positive male role models, she had David as her father and could develop relationships with other family members and friends naturally. Leslie looked disappointed but said she understood. She thanked me for letting her apologize and said she hoped someday I could forgive her for all the pain she'd caused. Then she left without any drama or begging, which was honestly a relief after all her previous emotional manipulation. But a few days later I got a text from David asking if we could talk. He said Leslie had told him about our conversation, and he had some concerns about the whole situation that he wanted to discuss with me. When I called David back, he said he was worried that Leslie was still not being completely honest about her motivations and feelings. He said she'd been pushing for him to have a more romantic relationship with her, and when he'd made it clear he wasn't interested, she'd started talking about how she wished things had worked out differently with me. David said he was concerned that Leslie was using Luna as a way to try to reconnect with me, and he didn't want his daughter to be caught in the middle of adult drama. He said he'd been very clear with Leslie that Luna's relationship with him was separate from any feelings Leslie might have about other men, and he didn't want me to feel pressured to get involved just because Leslie was suggesting it. I appreciated David looking out for both Luna and me, and I assured him that I had no intention of getting drawn back into Leslie's orbit. I said I thought it was best if Leslie, Luna, and I all stayed in our separate lanes going forward. David agreed and said he was glad we were on the same page. He said Leslie was a good mom to Luna, but she seemed to have trouble accepting that some bridges couldn't be rebuilt, and he was trying to help her focus on moving forward instead of looking backward.
My former bully threatened my business by saying, "My husband works for the bank that gave you your loan." When I asked her why she was doing this, she smiled and said, "Because watching you struggle made me feel powerful again." I just turned and walked away. That was 6 weeks ago. This morning, she texted me, "Use it if you need to. I can't be involved." She ordered a vanilla oat latte with a fake smile and a tone that sounded like she was doing me a favor. Her heels clicked across the polished floor like she still ruled the damn school. I recognized her immediately. Same forced laugh, same wide eyes that always scanned the room to make sure everyone was watching her. The years had been kind to her face but not her soul. That hadn't changed. "Name for the cup?" I asked. She stared at me before saying, "It's Melissa." No recognition in her voice, just another coffee girl to her. But I remembered everything. Melissa Winters, queen of passive aggression and homecoming court, voted most likely to succeed, and best hair. To me, she was the reason I ate lunch in the art room 3 years straight. The girl who started a rumor that I smelled weird and must have to wear a diaper. I didn't. The one who got the entire cheer squad to call me Spice Girl, because I wore the same cinnamon-scented lotion every day. She once sprayed air freshener in my direction, in the middle of class. I remember the worst day, during junior year. She'd walked behind me in the hallway and quietly stepped on the back of my shoes over and over until I tripped and broke my 2 front teeth. There was blood everywhere and the whole hallway laughed. She didn't even say sorry, just, "You should tie those better." That day, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried until my last class ended, then walked home so no one would see. It cost my family a fortune to get them fixed. And now here she was, at my shop. I smiled politely, coming right up. She sat at a corner table, typing something on her phone with the intensity of someone pretending they had more important things to do. I looked around. The morning rush had died down. There were maybe 7 other people in the shop, a few laptops, a couple on a date, one guy scrolling TikTok, and a pretty girl on her phone in the back. All eyes drifted lazily to the counter now and then. I grabbed a cup, and instead of Melissa, I wrote Bully in block letters. I steamed the milk slowly, with intention. When her drink was done, I set it gently on the pickup bar. "Vanilla oat latte for Bully?" I called, just loud enough. Heads turned, a few confused looks. One girl snorted into her muffin. Melissa stood up, confused. "What did you say?" I kept a straight face. "Vanilla oat latte for Bully." She hesitated, walked up, saw the cup. Her face dropped. "You're kidding," she said, quiet, just to me. I looked her dead in the eyes. "Sorry, that's what I heard." She opened her mouth, closed it, and looked around. The guy on TikTok definitely started recording. Melissa grabbed the cup and walked out quickly, cheeks burning. I watched her go, then turned back to the bar to make the next drink. She came back 3 days later with fire in her eyes. She went straight up to me and said, "Look, I don't know what your problem is, but I don't appreciate being humiliated." I wiped the counter calmly. "Funny," I said. "Neither did I." She flinched. "Wait, do I know you?" I smiled. "Not really, but I knew you. Very well." Her mouth opened slightly and I told her, "You wore a necklace every day in junior year, one with your boyfriend's initial, until he dumped you after the pep rally." Her face turned pale. I continued, "You once told a substitute teacher I was a special needs kid. The sub made me sit in the classroom's corner because she didn't want me to act out. You recorded everything on your phone." She looked down and couldn't meet my eyes. "I remember all of it, Melissa, and I don't want your apology. I don't need your friendship. I just needed you to feel something." She walked out without saying another word. A week later, a girl who was a regular here asked for an application, said she saw what I did that day and heard this place treats people right. I handed her the form with a smile. "Only rule," I said, "no bullies allowed." I thought that would be the end of it. I finally got my moment of justice after all these years. I went about my business running the shop, feeling lighter somehow, like I'd finally closed a chapter that had been hanging open for too long. But life is never that simple, especially when it comes to people like Melissa. 2 weeks passed without any sign of her. I started to relax again. My shop, the daily grind, was doing better than ever. I'd built it from scratch after working at 3 different coffee chains to learn the business. The place wasn't huge, but it was mine. Exposed brick walls, plants hanging from the ceiling, and mismatched furniture I'd collected from thrift stores. Local artists' work adorned the walls, changing monthly to give everyone a chance to showcase their talent. The wooden floors creaked pleasantly under customers' feet, and the smell of freshly ground beans filled the air from morning until closing. People came for the coffee but stayed for the vibe. I was proud of what I'd created. Then one morning, while checking emails before opening, I noticed a new review on our Google page. 1 star. The review claimed they found a bug in their coffee and that the staff was rude. It was signed MW. I knew immediately who it was. Melissa Winters. My stomach clenched as I read the detailed description of how supposedly unhygienic my shop was. I deleted the review and blocked the account, but 3 more appeared the next day from different accounts. All 1 star. All with similar complaints about dirty conditions and terrible service. I tried not to let it bother me. Bad reviews happen to every business. But then I noticed a drop in customers. Not dramatic, but enough to notice. The morning rush was lighter, the lunch crowd thinner. The tip jar that usually filled up by noon was barely half full by closing. I asked a regular Tim if he knew what was happening. He was a freelance writer who came in every day at 9 a.m. sharp for a double espresso and stayed until lunch. "Haven't you seen the posts?" he asked, showing me his phone. There was a local Facebook group for our neighborhood. Someone had started a thread about my coffee shop, claims of poor hygiene, rude service, and even one person saying they got sick after drinking our coffee. The original poster was anonymous, but the comments were filled with people I'd never seen in my shop before. Some even claimed to have photos of dirty conditions, though the pictures were clearly from some other establishment. I felt sick to my stomach. This was my livelihood. I'd put everything I had into this place. I took out loans I was still paying off. I worked 16-hour days for the first year, sleeping on a cot in the back room because I couldn't afford both rent and the shop lease. My hands were perpetually dry and cracked from washing dishes and cleaning equipment. And now someone was trying to destroy it all with lies. I knew it had to be Melissa. The timing was too perfect. I just couldn't prove it. I posted a response on the thread, inviting anyone with concerns to come speak to me directly. I offered free coffee to anyone who'd had a bad experience. Most of the commenters never showed up, which confirmed my suspicions they weren't real customers. The few who did come in seemed surprised by how clean and welcoming the place actually was. The next day, I was wiping down tables when the bell above the door jingled. I looked up to see Melissa walking in with 3 women I didn't recognize. They were all dressed in business casual designer bags on their arms, perfect makeup, and not a hair out of place. They sat at the largest table and didn't order anything, just watched me work while whispering to each other and occasionally laughing behind manicured hands. I approached them with my customer service smile, the one I'd perfected over years of dealing with difficult people. "Can I get you ladies anything?" I asked, notepad in hand. Melissa looked up at me with a smirk. "Just checking out the place. I've heard such interesting things." Her friends giggled like we were still in elevated school. One of them looked around with exaggerated disgust, as if searching for evidence of the filth described in those fake reviews. I maintained my composure. "Well, You can't really judge a coffee shop without trying the coffee. I turned to walk away, but Melissa grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her nails digging slightly into my skin. You know, Jamie, I looked you up after our last encounter. Turns out we have some mutual connections. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told her my name. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, pulling my arm away. She smiled wider. My husband works for First National Bank, the same bank that gave you your business loan. Small world, isn't it? I felt the blood drain from my face. My loan was coming up for review in a few months. I needed that extension to make it through the slower summer months. Without it, I'd have to let Zoe go, maybe even close down completely. Melissa stood up, smoothing her expensive blouse. You should have just made my coffee like a good little barista. Now you've made an enemy you can't afford. They all left, laughing as they walked out the door. I stood there, frozen. This wasn't just about embarrassing her anymore. She was threatening my business, my dream, everything I'd worked for. I had to do something. But what? I couldn't fight someone with connections to my bank. I couldn't afford to lose my loan. I closed early that day, sat in the empty shop trying to figure out what to do. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor as I went over my options. I considered apologizing, but knew it wouldn't matter. Melissa had found a way to hurt me, and she was enjoying it. This wasn't going to stop with an apology. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about elevated school, about how powerless I felt then. I promised myself I would never feel that way again. I built this life to be strong, independent. I wasn't going to let Melissa take that from me. Not again. I tossed and turned in my small apartment above the shop, listening to the occasional car pass by on the street below. The red numbers on my alarm clock seemed to mock me as they ticked toward morning. By the time dawn broke, my eyes were burning with exhaustion, but my mind was clearer than it had been in days. The next morning, I opened as usual, made coffee, smiled at customers, all while my mind raced with possible solutions. Around noon, a woman I'd never seen before came in. She ordered a simple black coffee and sat at the counter instead of taking a table. She was maybe in her 40s, with short gray hair and kind eyes behind stylish glasses. She had an air of quiet confidence that immediately put me at ease. "This is a nice place you've got," she said after taking a sip. "Thank you," I replied automatically. "I'm Diane," she continued. "I own the bookstore down the street. I'd passed it many times but never gone in." "Jamie," I said, extending my hand. "Nice to meet you." "I saw that Facebook thread," Diane said bluntly. "Complete garbage. I've sent plenty of my customers your way, and they all love this place." I felt a rush of gratitude. "Thanks. It's been a rough few days." Diane leaned forward. "Small businesses have to stick together, especially against people like Melissa Winters." I nearly dropped the mug I was cleaning. "You know her?" Diane's face hardened. "Everyone in the business association knows her, or more specifically, her husband Richard. He's been trying to buy up properties on this block for months, wants to tear everything down for some luxury condo development." My mind was racing. This wasn't just about revenge for Melissa. There was more to it. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Diane smiled. "Because you stood up to her, and because I think you and I might be able to help each other." I sat down with Diane after the lunch rush died down. She explained that Richard Winters had been quietly buying properties all over the neighborhood for the past year. His development company wanted to build elevated end condos and retail spaces that would completely change the character of our little district. Most of the local business owners were fighting it, but some had already sold out. "The bank connection isn't a coincidence," Diane said, stirring her second cup of coffee. "Richard sits on the board. He's been known to make things difficult for property owners who won't sell." I felt sick. This wasn't just Melissa being petty. This was calculated. "So the reviews, the Facebook posts, pressure tactics," Diane nodded. "They've done it before in other neighborhoods. Bad reviews, health code complaints, even calling the city about made-up violations. They make running your business so difficult that selling seems like the only option." I ran my hand through my hair, trying to process everything. "What can I do? I can't fight people like that. I'm just trying to run a coffee shop." Diane's eyes lit up. "That's exactly why I came to talk to you. The business association is meeting tonight. We're organizing to fight this development. You should come." I hesitated. I wasn't a fighter. Never had been. That's why Melissa had targeted me in elevated school. I was an easy mark. But this was different. This was my livelihood, my dream. "I'll be there," I said finally. The meeting was held in the back room of Diane's bookstore. About 15 local business owners crowded around a large table covered in maps and documents. I recognized most of them. The guy who ran the vintage record store, the couple who owned the Thai restaurant on the corner, the woman who managed the local hardware store that had been there for generations. They all looked worried. A man named Marcus was speaking when I walked in. He owned the barbershop 3 doors down from my coffee shop. "They've already bought the old laundromat and the vacant lot behind it. Word is they're in negotiations for the whole eastern block." Diane introduced me to everyone. "Jamie's been experiencing the Winters special treatment too," she explained. The room filled with sympathetic murmurs. Apparently, I wasn't the only one getting fake reviews and mysterious complaints. "We need to stick together," said Elena, who owned a small art gallery. "If none of us sell, they can't build their monstrosity." "Easy for you to say," countered an older man named Frank. "Your building isn't up for a tax reassessment this year. Some of us can't afford to hold out." The meeting continued like this for hours. Everyone had a different situation, different pressures. Some owned their buildings, others rented. Some had long-term leases, others were month to month. But the common thread was clear. Richard Winters was systematically trying to force us all out. I left the meeting with a mix of emotions. I was scared about what might happen to my shop, but also strangely energized. For the first time, I wasn't facing a bully alone. We had a plan, a community petition, a social media campaign highlighting local businesses, and a meeting with the city council to oppose the zoning changes Richard would need for his development. The next morning, I arrived at my shop early to prep for the day. As I approached the door, my heart sank. Someone had spray-painted "health hazard" across my front window in bright red letters. I looked around, but the street was empty. It was barely 5 a.m. I spent the next hour scrubbing the paint off. By the time I finished, my hands were raw and my opening was delayed. A few regular customers helped me clean up, which lifted my spirits a bit. One of them, a guy named Jordan who worked at the tech startup down the street, Took photos of the vandalism before we removed it. For evidence, he said. This is harassment. I nodded, but didn't really think the police would care about some graffiti. Still, I filed a report online, not expecting much to come of it. The next few days were tense. I jumped at every customer who came through the door, half expecting to see Melissa or her friends. I checked my online reviews obsessively, flagging the fake ones as fast as they appeared. I was exhausted and paranoid. Then, on Thursday morning, a man in a suit entered the shop. He wasn't one of my regulars. He ordered a simple black coffee and then handed me a business card. Richard Winters, it read. Winters Development Group. My hands shook as I made his coffee. Melissa's husband, the man trying to destroy my business. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with the confident air of someone used to getting his way. He was handsome in that generic, privileged way. Good haircut, expensive watch, perfect teeth. Nice place you've got here, he said, looking around with calculated interest. Very quaint. I set his coffee on the counter harder than necessary, some of it sloshing over the rim. What do you want? He smiled, not bothered by my rudeness. Direct. I like that. He took a sip of coffee. Actually, this is quite good. Melissa said it was terrible, but she's not really a coffee person. I crossed my arms, waiting. Richard set down his cup. I'll get to the point. I'm interested in buying this building. I'm prepared to make a very generous offer to the owner. I'm the owner, I said flatly. His eyebrows raised slightly, the only indication of surprise. Well, that makes things simpler. I'm prepared to offer you 20% above market value. Cash deal. Quick closing. I almost laughed. I'm not selling. Richard's smile didn't waver. I understand your attachment to the place, but be realistic. This neighborhood is changing. Our development will bring in higher-end clientele. Property values will increase. Rents will go up. Can your little coffee shop really compete with a Starbucks or a Blue Bottle? We've been doing fine so far, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. The truth was, business had been slower since the fake reviews started. I was already dipping into my savings to make payroll. Richard nodded as if he could read my thoughts. Think about it. This is a good offer. It won't be on the table forever. He slid a folder across the counter. My card's inside. Call me when you're ready to discuss details. After he left, I opened the folder. The offer was substantial, enough to pay off my loans and still have a decent amount left over. I could start over somewhere else, maybe in a neighborhood with cheaper rent. For a moment, I considered it. Then I remembered elevated school, how I'd let Melissa push me around, how I'd hidden instead of standing up for myself, how I'd spent years feeling ashamed for being a victim. I closed the folder and shoved it under the counter. That evening, I called Diane to tell her about Richard's visit. She wasn't surprised. He's been making the rounds, offered Elena double what her gallery is worth. Is she taking it? I asked, dreading the answer. No, Diane said firmly. None of us are. That's what we decided at the meeting. We stand together or we all fall. I felt a surge of relief. What's our next move? Community meeting tomorrow night at the community center. The whole neighborhood, not just business owners. We need to show the city council that people care about keeping this area the way it is. I promised to be there and to bring as many of my customers as I could. I spent the next day handing out flyers with every coffee I served, explaining the situation to anyone who would listen. Most people were supportive. They liked the quirky, independent vibe of our neighborhood and didn't want to see it replaced with luxury condos and chain stores. By closing time, I was feeling cautiously optimistic. I was locking up when Zoe, my blue-haired employee, came rushing back in. Jamie, you need to see this, she said, thrusting her phone at me. It was an Instagram post from Melissa, a photo of my coffee shop with a long caption about how the place was failing health inspections and serving expired products. She claimed to have insider information and warned people to stay away. The post had hundreds of likes and dozens of comments, many from people saying they'd never visit my shop. She can't just lie like that, Zoe said indignantly. That's defamation or something, right? I nodded numbly, still staring at the post. Yeah, but proving it would take money I don't have, and lawyers, and time. I handed the phone back to Zoe. Let's just focus on the community meeting tomorrow. That's our best poop. The next day was a disaster. A health inspector showed up first thing in the morning. Someone had filed a complaint. Anonymous, of course. I had to stop serving customers while he went through the entire kitchen. He found nothing wrong. I was meticulous about cleanliness. But the damage was done. People saw the inspector and walked right past the shop. Then, around noon, a plumbing issue erupted. The sink backed up, flooding part of the shop. I had to close early to deal with it. The plumber who came said someone had deliberately stuffed something down the drain. Looks like rags, he said, pulling out soggy material. Someone really did a number on your pipes. I was furious but also scared. Things were escalating. This wasn't just bad reviews anymore. Someone had physically sabotaged my business. I called Diane to tell her what happened. Are you still coming tonight? She asked after listening to my story. I don't know, I admitted. I'm dealing with a lot here. That's exactly why you need to come, Diane insisted. They're trying to isolate you, make you feel alone. Don't let them win. She was right. I knew she was right, but I was exhausted and demoralized. I'll try, I said finally. After the plumber left, I sat in my empty shop, surrounded by the mess from the flooding. I put my head in my hands, and for the first time since this all started, I cried. Not just about the shop, but about everything. About elevated school, about Melissa, about feeling powerless all over again. A knock on the door startled me. I looked up to see Jordan, the tech guy who'd helped me clean the graffiti. He held up a bag from the Thai restaurant down the street. Thought you might need dinner, he said through the glass. I wiped my eyes quickly and went to let him in. We're closed, I said unnecessarily. I know, he replied, stepping inside and surveying the damage. Rough day? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without crying again. Jordan set the food down on a dry table and rolled up his sleeves. Let me help you clean up, then we can go to that meeting together. I wanted to protest, to say I could handle it myself, but the truth was I couldn't. Not alone. Thank you, I said simply. We worked side by side for the next hour, mopping up water and rearranging furniture. Jordan was easy to talk to. He told me he came to my shop every day because it reminded him of a place he used to go in college. He liked the atmosphere, The mismatched mugs, the local art on the walls. Places like mine were disappearing, he said, replaced by sterile corporate chains where everything looked the same. By the time we finished, I felt better. Not great, but better. We ate the Thai food quickly, then headed to the community center. The meeting was already underway when we arrived. The room was packed, way more people than I expected. Diane waved us over to seats she'd saved near the front. A woman I didn't recognize was speaking. These developers don't care about our community. They see dollar signs, not people, not history. The crowd applauded. I looked around, amazed at the turnout. There were families with kids, elderly residents who'd lived in the neighborhood for decades, young professionals like Jordan, all united against Richard Winter's development plan. Then I spotted Melissa and Richard, sitting near the back. They looked uncomfortable, clearly not expecting this level of opposition. Richard was on his phone, barely paying attention. Melissa was staring daggers at anyone who spoke against the development. When it was my turn to speak, I was nervous. Public speaking had never been my thing, but I stood up anyway, cleared my throat, and told my story. About building my coffee shop from nothing. About creating a space where people could connect. About the recent harassment, the fake reviews, the health inspector, the plumbing sabotage. I didn't mention Melissa by name, but I saw her shift uncomfortably in her seat. Good. Let her squirm. This isn't just about my shop, I concluded. It's about what kind of neighborhood we want to live in. One where small, independent businesses can thrive, or one where everything is owned by corporations and developers who don't care about community. The applause was deafening. As I sat down, Jordan squeezed my hand. That was amazing, he whispered. After the meeting, people kept coming up to me, offering support. Some promised to leave positive reviews to counteract the fake ones. Others said they'd start coming to my shop regularly. A local journalist asked if she could interview me for a story about development pressures in the area. I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned to find Richard Winters standing there. His smile was gone, replaced by a cold stare. Quite a performance, he said, but it won't change anything. The zoning board already has our proposal. 3 members are personal friends. This little community uprising is touching but ultimately pointless. Before I could respond, Diane appeared at my side. Is there a problem here, Jamie? Richard's expression shifted instantly back to professional charm. No problem at all. Just congratulating Jamie on her speech. He nodded to both of us and walked away, rejoining Melissa by the door. Don't let him intimidate you, Diane said. He's worried. That's why he came over. They didn't expect this much opposition. I nodded, trying to believe her. But Richard's confidence had shaken me. Did he really have the zoning board in his pocket? Was all of this effort for nothing? The next few days were better. The community meeting had energized people. My shop was busier than usual, with many customers explicitly saying they'd come to show support. The local paper ran a story about small businesses fighting back against development, featuring a photo of me in front of my shop. Zoe joked that I was becoming a local celebrity, but the harassment didn't stop. Someone kept calling in noise complaints to the police, claiming my shop was playing music too loudly after hours. My suppliers started getting calls canceling my orders, calls I never made. One morning I arrived to find my outdoor seating had been vandalized, chairs broken and tables overturned. Through it all, I kept going. I fixed what was broken. I clarified the canceled orders. I explained to the police that I wasn't even open during the times of the supposed noise violations. It was exhausting, but I refused to give up. The community support helped enormously. Jordan became a regular fixture at the shop, often staying until closing to make sure nothing happened. He used his tech skills to help me document everything and secure my online accounts. Other business owners checked in regularly, sharing their own experiences and strategies. Then, about a week after the community meeting, Zoe came rushing into the shop during her day off. Jamie, you need to see this, she said, pulling up a video on her phone. It was from TikTok, the same guy who had recorded Melissa's reaction to the bully cup that first day. He'd compiled that footage with new videos of people supporting my shop, talking about the development fight, and showing the vandalism. The caption read, "Local bully tries to shut down coffee shop, neighborhood fights back." It had thousands of views and supportive comments. It's going viral, Zoe said excitedly. People are sharing it everywhere. I watched the video again, amazed. The story was resonating with people far beyond our neighborhood. Many commenters shared similar experiences with developers in their own communities. Others recognized Melissa from Elevated School and had their own stories about her bullying. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, thinking it might be another harassment call, but something made me pick up. "Is this Jamie from the Daily Grind?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, it is," I replied cautiously. "This is Amanda Chen from the City Council. I saw that video about your situation. I'd like to meet with you and some of the other business owners affected by the Winters development proposal." I nearly dropped the phone. A city council member had seen the video. This was bigger than I thought. "Of course," I managed to say. "When would you like to meet?" We arranged a meeting for the following day at Diane's bookstore. I immediately called Diane to tell her the news. She was ecstatic. "This is exactly what we needed. Amanda Chen is one of the swing votes on the council. If we can get her on our side, we might actually stop this thing." The meeting with Councilwoman Chen went better than I could have hoped. She listened carefully as each business owner shared their experiences with Richard's pressure tactics. She took notes and asked thoughtful questions. She seemed genuinely concerned about preserving the character of the neighborhood. "The council votes on this zoning change next week," she said as the meeting concluded. "I can't promise anything, but I'll bring these concerns to my colleagues. This kind of business intimidation is unacceptable, regardless of how we vote on the development itself." As we were leaving, she pulled me aside. "That video was powerful. Personal stories matter. Would you be willing to speak at the council meeting? Put a face to this issue?" The old me would have said no immediately. Public speaking at a community meeting was one thing. Addressing the city council was another level entirely. But I wasn't the old me anymore. "Yes," I said. "I'll be there." The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Diane helped me draft my statement. Jordan researched the zoning laws so I could speak knowledgeably about the technical aspects. Elena from the art gallery designed posters for a rally before the council meeting. exciting. The whole neighborhood seemed to be rallying around our cause. Then, 2 days before the council vote, Richard Winters came to my shop again. This time, he wasn't alone. Melissa was with him, along with a man in an expensive suit I didn't recognize. Jamie, Richard said smoothly, I'd like to introduce you to David Keller. He's the regional manager for Sunrise Coffee Company. I froze. Sunrise was a rapidly expanding chain that was trying to compete with Starbucks. They were known for moving into trendy neighborhoods and pushing out independent coffee shops. David extended his hand. Nice to meet you. Richard has told me a lot about your operation here. I shook his hand automatically, my mind racing. What was this about? Richard smiled, clearly enjoying my confusion. David is interested in opening a Sunrise location in our new development, but he's also expressed interest in possibly acquiring existing local businesses, a sort of rebrand situation. I understood immediately. This was a new tactic. If they couldn't force me out, they'd try to buy me out. Not just the building, but the business itself. I'm not interested, I said firmly. David looked surprised. You haven't even heard our offer. I don't need to, I replied. The daily grind isn't for sale. Not to you, not to anyone. Richard's smile tightened. Be reasonable, Jamie. This could be very lucrative for you. Sunrise would keep you on as manager. You'd have corporate benefits, a steady salary, much more security than running an independent shop in this economy. I looked at Melissa, who had been silent this whole time. She was watching me with a strange expression, not quite the hatred I expected, but something more complex, almost like respect. The answer is no, I repeated. Now if you'll excuse me, I have customers waiting. They left without further argument, but I knew this wasn't over. Richard wasn't used to being told no. Neither was Melissa. They would try something else. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Richard had said about security. He wasn't wrong. Running a small business was risky. I had no safety net, no corporate backing. If something happened to the shop, I'd lose everything. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Smart move turning down Sunrise. They chew up local places and spit them out. Melissa? That couldn't be right. I stared at the text, confused. Why would Melissa be texting me supportive messages? It had to be someone else. Maybe Marcus from the barber shop? Or Michelle from the flower shop down the street? I didn't respond. It was probably just another mind game. I needed to focus on the council meeting, not get distracted by cryptic texts. The day of the city council meeting arrived. I closed the shop early so everyone could attend. The council chambers were packed when we arrived. News of our fight had spread, and people from all over the city had come to show support. I spotted Richard and Melissa near the front, surrounded by people in business attire, lawyers and consultants probably. The meeting began with technical presentations about the development. Richard's team showed glossy renderings of modern buildings with rooftop gardens and pedestrian plazas. They talked about increased tax revenue and job creation. It all looked very impressive and professional compared to our grassroots opposition. Then it was our turn. Diane spoke first, presenting our petition with over 2,000 signatures. Other business owners followed, each telling their personal stories of harassment and intimidation. The mood in the room shifted as these testimonies accumulated. Even some council members who had seemed supportive of the development at the beginning were now frowning and asking pointed questions. Finally, it was my turn. I walked to the podium, my heart pounding. The room was silent as I adjusted the microphone. I looked out at the sea of faces, neighbors, customers, fellow business owners. Then my eyes landed on Melissa. She was watching me intently, her expression unreadable. I took a deep breath and began my prepared statement. I talked about building my business from nothing, about creating a community space where people connected, about the harassment I'd experienced since refusing to sell. Then I went off script. This isn't just about zoning or property values, I said. It's about power, about whether we let people with money and connections dictate what our community looks like. I've dealt with bullies before. In elevated school, I let them win. I stayed quiet. I hid. I'm not doing that anymore. I looked directly at Melissa as I said this. To my surprise, she didn't look away. Our neighborhood isn't perfect. It could use some improvements, but those should come from within the community, not imposed by outside developers who see us as nothing but a profit opportunity. The room erupted in applause when I finished. As I returned to my seat, Jordan squeezed my hand. That was incredible, he whispered. The council members asked questions for another hour, then announced they would deliberate and vote at their next meeting in 2 days. It wasn't the immediate victory we'd hoped for, but it wasn't a defeat either. We'd made our case strongly. Now we had to wait. As people filed out of the chambers, I found myself face to face with Melissa. She was alone, Richard having left with his team of consultants. That was quite a speech, she said. Her tone wasn't sarcastic or angry, just matter of fact. Thanks, I replied cautiously. She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then lowered her voice. Was I really that terrible in elevated school? The question caught me off guard. Yes, I said honestly. You were. She nodded slowly. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, since you called me out in your shop. She looked uncomfortable, which was a new look for Melissa Winters. I don't remember half the things you said I did. That's not an excuse. It's actually worse, isn't it? That I could hurt someone so badly and not even remember it. I didn't know what to say. This wasn't the conversation I expected to have today, or ever. Anyway, she continued when I didn't respond, that text last night was from me. Richard doesn't know I sent it. He doesn't know I'm talking to you now. But you should know that Sunrise has a history of pushing out local businesses. They promise to keep the original owners on, but they always find a reason to let them go within a year. Why are you telling me this? I asked, suspicious. Melissa looked around again, then met my eyes. Because I'm starting to think I married Richard for the same reason I was a bully in elevated school. It made me feel powerful to be with someone who could crush others. But lately, she trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. Just be careful. Richard doesn't like to lose. Before I could respond, she walked away, her heels clicking on the marble floor of the council chambers. I stood there, stunned. Was this another manipulation? Or was Melissa Winters actually developing a conscience after all these years? I didn't have time to dwell dwell on it. The next 2 days were crucial. We needed to keep the pressure on the council members before their vote. We organized a letter-writing campaign, encouraged people to call their representatives, and planned a rally for the morning of the vote. The night before the final council meeting, I stayed late at the shop, going over my notes for a possible follow-up statement. Jordan had stayed to help, as he often did these days. We'd grown closer through this whole ordeal. He was smart, kind, and surprisingly funny once you got past his initial shyness. In another situation, I might have considered it the beginning of something more than friendship. But right now, my focus had to be on saving my business. Do you think we have a chance? I asked him as we locked up. He considered the question seriously. I think so. The council seemed genuinely concerned about the tactics Richard's been using, and the community support has been amazing. I nodded, trying to believe it. I just keep waiting for Richard to pull some last-minute trick. He doesn't seem like the type to accept defeat gracefully. Whatever happens, you've already won in a way, Jordan said. You stood up to them. You didn't let them intimidate you into selling. That counts for something. I smiled, grateful for his optimism. Thanks for sticking with me through all this. I couldn't have done it alone. He shrugged, suddenly shy again. That's what friends do. We said goodnight, and I headed up to my apartment above the shop. As I climbed the stairs, I felt a strange sense of peace. Jordan was right. Whatever happened tomorrow, I'd stood my ground. I hadn't let Melissa or Richard bully me into submission. The scared girl from elevated school would be proud. I was just getting ready for bed when my phone buzzed with another text from Melissa's number. Check your email, now. Curious and a little alarmed, I opened my email. There was a new message from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read simply, Council Vote. I opened it and found a forwarded email chain between Richard and 2 council members, discussing how they would ensure the zoning change passed regardless of public opposition. There were references to campaign contributions and future business opportunities. It was clearly unethical, possibly illicit. My phone buzzed again. Use it if you need to. I can't be involved. I stared at the messages in disbelief. Melissa had just handed me ammunition against her own husband. Why would she do that? Was it a trap? Or was she genuinely trying to make amends for the past? I forwarded the emails to Diane, Jordan, and Councilwoman Chen, then tried to sleep. My mind was racing with possibilities. If these emails were legitimate, they could change everything. But if they were fake, using them could backfire spectacularly. The next morning, I arrived at City Hall early for our rally. Diane was already there, setting up a table with signs and buttons. Did you see what I sent last night? I asked her quietly. She nodded, her expression serious. Amanda is looking into it. If it's real, it's a game changer, but we need to be careful. Richard has powerful friends. The rally grew as more people arrived. By the time the council meeting was set to begin, there were at least 100 supporters outside City Hall. We marched in together, filling the council chambers to capacity. Richard and his team were already there, looking confident despite the show of opposition. The meeting began with procedural matters. I kept scanning the room for Melissa but didn't see her. Had she decided not to come? Was she afraid of what might happen if those emails were made public? Finally, the zoning change came up for discussion. The council president announced that before they voted, Councilwoman Chen had requested time to address some new information that had come to light. Richard shifted in his seat, looking suddenly uncomfortable. Chen spoke carefully, not directly referencing the emails but raising concerns about improper influence in the zoning process. She suggested postponing the vote pending an ethics investigation. 2 other council members quickly agreed, looking pointedly at their colleagues implicated in the emails. Richard stood up, his face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. We've followed every procedure to the letter. These delay tactics are just an attempt to unalive a project that would benefit the entire city. The council president called for order. After a brief discussion, they voted 5-2 to postpone the decision and refer the matter to the ethics committee. It wasn't a definitive victory, but it was a significant setback for Richard's plans. As the meeting adjourned, I finally spotted Melissa standing at the back of the room. Our eyes met briefly before she turned and walked out. I wanted to follow her, to ask why she'd helped us, but the moment was lost in the crowd of celebrating supporters surrounding me. Outside City Hall, Diane pulled me into a hug. We did it, at least for now. The ethics investigation will take months, and by then we'll have had time to organize even more opposition. I smiled, relieved but also strangely unsettled. I still can't believe Melissa sent those emails. It doesn't make sense. People are complicated, Diane said wisely. Maybe seeing you stand up to her made her rethink some things. Or maybe she and Richard are having problems. Either way, we got lucky. The celebration continued at my coffee shop, which I opened specially for the occasion, despite it being my day off. The place was packed with supporters, everyone talking excitedly about the council meeting and what would happen next. Jordan helped me serve coffee and pastries, both of us grinning like we'd won the lottery. Around sunset, as the crowd was thinning, the bell above the door jingled. I looked up to see Melissa standing there alone. The shop went quiet as people recognized her. She looked uncomfortable but determined as she walked up to the counter. Can we talk? She asked quietly. Alone? I hesitated, then nodded. Let's go upstairs. I led her to my small apartment above the shop, aware of the curious eyes following us. Once we were alone, Melissa seemed at a loss for words. She wandered around my living room, looking at the photos on the walls, the books on my shelves. Finally, she turned to face me. Richard's furious, she said. He knows someone leaked those emails. He doesn't suspect me yet, but he will eventually. Why did you do it? I asked. He's your husband, she sighed, sitting down on my couch without waiting for an invitation. It's complicated. When I met Richard, I was impressed by his confidence, his ambition. He reminded me of who I was in elevated school, someone who knew what they wanted and took it. But lately, I've been seeing another side of him, the way he treats people who get in his way. Like me, I said. She nodded. Like you, and others. He's not just aggressive in business. He's cruel. He enjoys watching people squirm. She looked down at her hands. It reminded me of things I did in elevated school, things I've tried to forget. I sat down across from her, still wary but also curious. So this is what? Your redemption arc? She laughed. a genuine sound I'd never heard from her before. I don't think one good deed makes up for years of being awful, but it's a start maybe. She met my eyes. I'm sorry, Jamie. For elevated school. For what Richard and I have been doing to your business. All of it. I didn't know what to say. I'd imagined confronting Melissa many times over the years, but never like this. Never with her apologizing. What happens now? I asked finally. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. I don't know. Richard won't give up on the development. It's too important to him. But the ethics investigation will slow things down. You've bought some time. And what about you? Won't he be suspicious if you suddenly switch sides? Melissa smiled sadly. I'm not switching sides. Not publicly anyway. As far as Richard knows, I'm still 100% behind him. It's safer that way. I walked her to the door, still trying to process this strange turn of events. As she was leaving, she turned back. You know, I always thought you were weak in elevated school. That's why I picked on you. But you're not. You're actually one of the strongest people I've ever met. After she left, I stood in my doorway for a long time, thinking about how people can surprise you. How the girl who made my life heck could end up being an unlikely ally. How sometimes standing up for yourself can change not just your own story, but someone else's too. I went back downstairs to find Jordan waiting for me. Everything okay? He asked, concern evident in his voice. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Yeah, I think it might be. The fight wasn't over. Richard would regroup, come up with new tactics. The ethics investigation might not find enough evidence to stop the development permanently. But for now, we'd won a battle, and I'd found strength I didn't know I had. As Jordan and I cleaned up the shop together, I thought about how sometimes the best revenge isn't public humiliation or getting even. Sometimes it's simply living well and standing your ground. Sometimes it's showing your bully that they didn't break you, that you built something beautiful despite them. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's watching them realize they were wrong about you all along. The next morning, I woke up feeling weirdly optimistic, like maybe things were finally turning around. I made myself a cup of coffee using my personal favorite beans, this Ethiopian blend that costs way too much but tastes like heaven, and sat by my window watching the neighborhood come to life. The bakery across the street was already open, the smell of fresh bread drifting up to my apartment. A few early joggers passed by, and the old guy who walked his corgi every morning at exactly 6:15 waved up at me. I opened my shop at 7 as usual. Jordan showed up around 8 with a box of donuts from the bakery down the street. Thought we could use some sugar after yesterday, he said, setting them on the counter. I grabbed one with chocolate frosting and took a huge bite, not caring about the calories. After the roller coaster of the past few weeks, I deserved it. So what's the plan now? Jordan asked, leaning against the counter. Richard's not going to just give up. I shrugged, licking frosting off my fingers. I guess we wait for the ethics investigation and keep fighting. What else can we do? The morning rush kept us busy, with more customers than usual. Word had spread about the council meeting, and people kept coming in to congratulate me. It felt good to have so much support, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just a temporary victory. Richard Winters didn't seem like the type to accept defeat gracefully. Around noon, Diane stopped by with news. The ethics committee is moving fast, she said, accepting the coffee I handed her. Apparently, those emails weren't the only questionable things Richard's been up to. Once they started digging, they found a pattern. That's good, right? I asked. Very good, Diane nodded. But Richard knows he's in trouble. He's been calling council members all morning, trying to do damage control. I thought about Melissa's warning. Richard wouldn't give up easily. What should we expect? Diane sipped her coffee thoughtfully. Hard to say. He might try to fast-track the development before the investigation concludes, or he might come after us individually, try to find dirt or create problems. Great. Just what I needed. More problems. I'd barely kept my head above water with all the harassment so far, but I wasn't about to back down now. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. I kept waiting for something bad to happen. More fake reviews, another health inspection, maybe even more vandalism, but nothing did. It was almost more stressful waiting for the other shoe to drop than dealing with actual problems. Jordan stayed until closing again. We'd fallen into a comfortable routine over the past few weeks. Him helping me close up, sometimes grabbing dinner after. Nothing romantic had happened, but I'd be lying if I said I hadn't thought about it. He was cute in that nerdy way, with his glasses and slightly too long hair that fell into his eyes when he concentrated. Plus, he'd stuck by me through all this drama when he barely knew me. That said a lot about his character. Want to grab food? He asked as I locked the front door. There's a new Thai place that opened on Maple Street. I was about to say yes when my phone buzzed. A text from Melissa. Richard's planning something. Be careful. I showed Jordan the text. His face grew serious. Maybe we should stay here tonight. Make sure nothing happens to the shop. Part of me wanted to dismiss Melissa's warning. Maybe this was all some elaborate game she was playing. But the emails she'd sent had been real enough. And what did she have to gain by helping me now? You don't have to stay, I told Jordan. This isn't your fight. He gave me a look that made my heart do a little flip. Of course it's my fight. This neighborhood matters to me too. And, he hesitated, suddenly looking shy. You matter to me. We ordered pizza instead of going out and set up a little stakeout in my shop. Jordan brought his laptop and set up a makeshift security system using the shop's webcam and some app he'd created. It'll send alerts to our phones if there's any movement outside, he explained. I was impressed. Tech stuff was definitely not my forte. We sat at a table by the window, eating pizza and watching the occasional car drive by. It was kind of nice actually, peaceful. For a few hours, I almost forgot about Richard and his development plans and all the stress of the past weeks. Around midnight, Jordan's phone pinged. He checked the alert, then pointed outside. Someone's out there. I peered through the darkness. A figure was moving around the side of my building, near where the trash cans were kept. Should we call the police? I whispered. Jordan was already dialing. Yes, hello? I'd like to report a suspicious person at the Daily Grind coffee shop on Oak Street. We watched as the figure, a man in dark clothes, placed something next to the building, then quickly walked away. My heart was pounding. What had he left there? An explosive? That seemed extreme, even for Richard. More likely some kind of vandalism. The police arrived within minutes, lights flashing. 2 officers approached the side of the building cautiously. One of them picked up whatever had been left there, examining it with a flashlight. Then they both seemed to relax. Jordan and I went outside to talk to them. What was it? I asked nervously. The officer held up a can. Just some paint. Looks like someone was planning to graffiti your wall but got spooked. I felt a mix of relief and anger. More vandalism. Exactly what I'd feared. Did you see who it was? I asked. No, they were gone by the time we arrived, the officer said. We'll file a report, but honestly, there's not much we can do without more information. After the police left, Jordan and I went back inside. That was definitely one of Richard's people, I said, pacing angrily. He's still trying to harass me into selling. Jordan nodded grimly. At least we caught it before any damage was done. The security setup worked. We decided to take turns keeping watch for the rest of the night. Jordan took the first shift while I tried to get some sleep on the small couch in my office. But I couldn't really sleep. My mind was racing with thoughts of Richard and Melissa and the whole crazy situation. Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went back out to the main shop area. Jordan was still awake, staring intently at his laptop screen. Anything else happen? I asked. He shook his head. All quiet, but I've been thinking we should be more proactive. Right now, we're just reacting to whatever Richard does. We need to get ahead of him somehow. What did you have in mind? I asked, sliding into the chair next to him. Jordan turned his laptop toward me. On the screen was a social media campaign he'd drafted. Operation Save the Daily Grind, he called it. The idea was to flood social media with positive stories about my shop and the neighborhood, directly countering the negative reviews and highlighting the community aspect that would be lost if Richard's development went through. This is amazing, I said, scrolling through his draft. But will it be enough? It's a start, Jordan said. And I have another idea too. What if we organized a community event? Something big that would show how important local businesses are to the neighborhood. We could get all the shops involved, maybe close down the street for a day. I liked the sound of that. A big public demonstration of community support would be hard for the city council to ignore, and it would generate the kind of positive publicity we needed to counter Richard's influence. The next morning, despite our lack of sleep, Jordan and I got to work on both ideas. He launched the social media campaign while I started calling other business owners about the community event. Everyone was enthusiastic. Elena from the art gallery offered to coordinate with local artists for displays. Marcus from the barbershop said he'd provide free haircuts. The Thai restaurant promised food. Even Frank, who had been skeptical at the business association meeting, agreed to participate. We set the date for the following Saturday, just 3 days away. It was short notice, but we wanted to capitalize on the momentum from the council meeting. Diane helped us secure the necessary permits to close down the street, calling in favors from her contacts at City Hall. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. I barely had time to worry about what Richard might be planning next. The social media campaign was taking off, with hundreds of people sharing their favorite memories of my shop and other local businesses. The hashtag Save Our Neighborhood was trending locally. Jordan's tech friends had even created a website where people could sign up to volunteer for the event or donate to help cover costs. On Friday afternoon, as I was making a list of supplies we'd need for the next day, the bell above my door jingled. I looked up to see Melissa walking in. She was alone again, dressed more casually than usual in jeans and a simple blouse. She looked tired. Hi, she said awkwardly. I heard about your event tomorrow. It's all over social media. I nodded, not sure what to say. Our last conversation had been so strange, and I still wasn't entirely sure I trusted her. Are you here to warn me about something else Richard is planning? She shook her head. Actually, I'm here because... She took a deep breath. I want to help. I must have looked as shocked as I felt because she quickly added, I know, it's weird, but I meant what I said about wanting to make amends, and I think what you're doing is important. I studied her face, looking for signs of deception, but all I saw was sincerity and maybe a hint of nervousness. What about Richard? Won't he be suspicious if you're suddenly helping his opposition? Richard and I are... She paused, choosing her words carefully, taking some time apart. After I saw those emails, I confronted him about his business practices. We had a big fight. I'm staying with my sister for now. This was getting more complicated by the minute. I appreciate the offer, Melissa, but I'm not sure it's a good idea. People here know who you are, what you've been involved in. She nodded, understanding. I know. I don't expect to be welcomed with open arms, but I have skills that could help. I used to work in event planning before I married Richard, and I know how he thinks, which could be useful. I considered her offer. Having Melissa on our side could indeed be valuable, especially if she really did know Richard's playbook. But could I trust her? The emails she'd leaked seemed genuine, and her warning about the vandalism had proven accurate. Still, this was the woman who had tormented me in elevated school, and then helped her husband try to destroy my business. Let me think about it, I said finally, and maybe talk to some of the others involved. She nodded, looking relieved that I hadn't immediately rejected her offer. Fair enough. Here's my number if you decide you want my help. She wrote it on a napkin and slid it across the counter. And Jamie, I really am sorry for everything. After she left, I called Diane and told her about Melissa's offer. It could be a trap, Diane said immediately. Richard might have put her up to this to sabotage the event. That's what I thought too, I admitted. But she seemed sincere, and she said she and Richard are separated now. People lie, Diane reminded me, especially people with something to gain. She was right, of course, but something in Melissa's demeanor had seemed genuine. The Melissa I knew in elevated school would never have apologized, never have admitted she was wrong. People can change, can't they? I decided to sleep on it. The next morning, the day of our big event, I woke up early and headed downstairs to start preparing. Jordan arrived shortly after, carrying boxes of printed materials and t-shirts with our hashtag. I've been thinking about Melissa's offer, I told him as we set up. What if we give her a chance? But keep her away from anything critical. Jordan looked skeptical. Are you sure that's wise? She was helping Richard try to run you out of business just a few weeks ago. I know, I sighed, but she also leaked those emails that might save our neighborhood, and she warned us about the vandalism. I shrugged. Maybe I'm being naive, but I want to believe people can change. After some discussion, we decided to call Melissa and offer her a limited role in the event, helping with setup and coordination, but nothing that could potentially sabotage the day if she was indeed still working with Richard. She arrived an hour later, dressed to work in jeans and a t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked nothing like the polished, intimidating woman who had first walked into my shop. "Thank you for giving me a chance," she said quietly. I handed her a list of tasks. "Just so we're clear, this doesn't mean I've forgotten or forgiven everything, but I'm willing to see if you're serious about making amends." She nodded, accepting the list. "That's fair." The street was already buzzing with activity. Vendors were setting up booths, musicians were doing sound checks, and volunteers were hanging banners and signs. The energy was infectious, everyone working together to showcase what made our neighborhood special. By noon, the event was in full swing. Hundreds of people filled the street, moving from booth to booth, enjoying food from local restaurants, watching performances by community groups, and signing petitions supporting our cause. The weather was perfect, sunny but not too hot, with a gentle breeze that kept everyone comfortable. I was running my coffee stand, serving free samples of my most popular drinks, when I spotted Richard at the edge of the crowd. He was watching everything with a cold, calculating expression. Our eyes met briefly before he turned and walked away. A chill ran down my spine despite the warm day. I found Jordan at the information booth and told him about Richard's appearance. "Should we be worried?" I asked. He frowned. "Maybe, but what can he do? There are too many people here for him to try anything obvious." I nodded, trying to convince myself he was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Richard wasn't done with us yet. Around 2 p.m., Melissa came running up to me looking panicked. "Jamie, we have a problem. The city just sent someone to check our permits. They're saying there's an issue with the street closure authorization." My heart sank. This had Richard written all over it. "Where are they?" I asked. Melissa pointed to a man in a city uniform talking to Diane near the main stage. We hurried over just in time to hear him say, "I'm sorry, but without the proper authorization, you'll need to clear the street immediately." "We have authorization," Diane insisted, showing him our permits. "These were approved 3 days ago." The city worker looked uncomfortable. "According to our records, the approval was rescinded yesterday afternoon. Something about safety concerns." "That's impossible," I said. "We weren't notified of any changes." He shrugged apologetically. "I'm just doing my job, ma'am. You have 1 hour to clear the street or I'll have to call in police assistance." As he walked away, Diane turned to us, her face pale. "This is Richard. It has to be. He must have pulled strings at the permit office." I felt sick. All our hard work, all the community support, ruined because Richard had connections we couldn't match. "What do we do?" I asked, looking around at the successful event that was about to be shut down. To my surprise, it was Melissa who spoke up. "I might be able to help. Richard's assistant Taylor owes me a favor. She might know who we talked to at the permit office." I hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Do it." Melissa stepped away to make the call while Diane, Jordan, and I tried to figure out a backup plan. We could move some activities to the sidewalks and into individual businesses, but it wouldn't be the same. The impact would be drastically reduced. A few minutes later, Melissa returned, looking triumphant. "Taylor came through. Richard called Councilman Davis yesterday, one of the ones implicated in those emails. Davis pressured the permit office to revoke our authorization. Knowing who did it doesn't help us now," Diane said grimly. "We still have to shut down." "Not necessarily," Melissa replied. "Taylor also told me that Richard and Davis are meeting right now at the Westside Golf Club. They're celebrating shutting us down." I didn't see how this helped until Melissa pulled out her phone and showed us a text conversation. I recorded Richard admitting to bribing Davis last month. I was going to use it if he tried to fight me on the separation, but this seems more important. The recording was clear, Richard discussing how much it would cost to get Davis on board with the development plans. It was explicit evidence of exactly the kind of corruption the ethics committee was investigating. "If we send this to Councilwoman Chen right now, she could use it to override Davis's interference with our permits," Melissa explained. "And more importantly, it would be the smoking firearm for the ethics investigation." I looked at her in amazement. "You'd really do that? Use evidence against your own husband?" She met my gaze steadily. "Ex-husband, soon enough. And yes, it's the right thing to do." We sent the recording to Chen immediately. While waiting for her response, we stalled the city worker, telling him we were working to resolve the permit issue. 30 tense minutes later, Chen herself showed up at our event. "Your permits are valid," she announced. "I've spoken to the department head personally, and I've also added this new evidence to the ethics investigation file." The relief was overwhelming. The event continued without further interruption, even more successful now that word had spread about Richard's attempt to shut us down. People who hadn't planned to attend showed up specifically to support us against the corrupt developer, a nickname for Richard that was quickly spreading on social media. As the day went down, I found myself standing next to Melissa, watching children play in a bounce house that Marcus had somehow procured. "Thank you," I said simply. "You didn't have to help us like that." She smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. "Actually, I did. Not just to make amends, but because it was the right thing to do. It took me way too long to figure that out." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment before she spoke again. "I'm moving back to my hometown next month. Fresh start, away from Richard and all the toxic stuff we created together. I think that's a good idea," I said honestly. Everyone deserves a second chance. The event wrapped up around sunset. By all measures, it had been a huge success. Local news had covered it extensively, and the hashtag had gone viral beyond our wildest expectations. Best of all, several council members had attended and publicly expressed support for preserving the neighborhood's character. As Jordan and I were cleaning up the last of the coffee stand, he bumped his shoulder against mine playfully. "So, we did it. Saved the neighborhood, reformed your elevated school bully, and threw the best block party this street has ever seen. What's next?" I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Sleep. Lots and lots of sleep. He grinned. Fair enough. But after that, maybe dinner? Just the two of us this time. No Richard drama, no neighborhood crisis. Just a date? My heart did that little flip again. I'd like that, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. 2 months later, the ethics investigation concluded with a damning report on Richard's business practices. The zoning change was permanently denied, and Richard's development company faced significant fines. The last I heard, he'd moved his operations to another city, hopefully one with stronger ethics oversight. Melissa made good on her promise to move away. She sent me a postcard from her hometown in Michigan, saying she'd started volunteering at a youth center, working with teenage girls on building self-esteem and preventing bullying. It made me smile to think of Melissa Winters, former queen bee, teaching girls not to be like her younger self. My coffee shop was doing better than ever. The publicity from our fight against the development had brought in new customers from all over the city. I'd even been able to hire 2 more employees besides Zoe, which meant I occasionally got a day off. And Jordan? Well, that dinner date led to another and another. Turns out the shy tech guy who helped save my business was also pretty great at making me laugh and reminding me to take breaks when I worked too hard. He still came by to help close the shop most nights, but now he stayed for different reasons. One evening, as we sat on the small balcony outside my apartment, watching the neighborhood settle into twilight, Jordan asked, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Melissa hadn't walked into your shop that day?" I considered the question. I'd probably still be serving coffee and avoiding elevated school reunions. My life would be quieter, that's for sure. But then we wouldn't have met, he pointed out. At least not like this. I leaned against his shoulder, thinking about all the twists and turns that had led us here. How Melissa's cruelty in elevated school had made me determined to create a safe, welcoming space in my coffee shop. How her reappearance had threatened that space but ultimately made it stronger. How standing up to her and Richard had shown me I wasn't that scared teenager anymore. I guess sometimes good things come from unexpected places, I said. The next morning, a new customer came into the shop. She looked nervous, clutching her purse tightly as she approached the counter. "Are you Jamie?" she asked hesitantly. I nodded, wondering what this was about. "I'm sorry to bother you," she continued, "but I read about what happened with your shop and the development. How you stood up to that bully from your past." She took a deep breath. "I'm dealing with something similar at work. My boss, she's making my life miserable. I was hoping you might have some advice." I smiled and gestured to the empty chair across from me. "I've got a few minutes before the morning rush. Let's talk." As I sat down with this stranger who was looking at me like I had all the answers, I realized something important. By standing up for myself and my business, I hadn't just saved my own dream. I'd become someone who could help others find their strength too. And maybe that was the best revenge of all. Not just surviving what Melissa had done to me, but thriving enough to help others do the same. The coffee shop was more than just my livelihood now. It was proof that standing your ground matters, that community matters, that you can face your past and come out stronger on the other side. I took a sip of my coffee, Ethiopian blend, still my favorite, and began to share what I'd learned about facing bullies and finding your voice. Outside, the neighborhood was coming to life, unchanged by Richard's development plans, but transformed nonetheless by the connections we'd all formed fighting to protect it. Some battles are worth fighting, even when they seem impossible to win. Sometimes the victory isn't in defeating your enemy, but in discovering your own strength along the way.